the Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast featuring the Crop Doctors.
Do the intro, Tom.
Good morning, everybody, from the Crop Doctors Podcast studio. Jason and I are here with our entomology team, Don Cook, Tyler Tolles. Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning.
Morning.
It's good to think fast on your feet, Tom. You didn't see that curveball coming, did
Nope, I did not see the curveball coming. I did hit it.
Don and Tyler are here because my phone traffic has slowed down. Mercifully, got a lot of stuff, in my world at least, that's been sprayed. Now, our fungicide man and our bug man are picking up, so I will gladly pass the torch on to y'all for 2024. Aside from some late planted stuff, hopefully.
I am, however, looking at a lot of pictures that probably need to come through your phone.
Plot-wise, we have some stuff, just a few things to spray the week of July 4th, and we will be done with that, which seems like that has gone on forever this year.
Our spray dates have just started.
Well, that's because your planting just wrapped up, Tom.
There's truth to that.
At least you're through planting.
Don, when you were in here and we talked about something bug-related, the last time you and Tyler were over here, I don't remember what that was. Oh, we talked about thrips.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question for you. I asked you about time travel, and you didn't disappoint, but also gave a little teaser that I had another one I was holding for you, and I've been waiting for this. And I don't even care if anybody wants to hear your answer besides me. I want to hear your answer.
I can't understand your fascination with my perspective on things.
Well, it's a fascinating perspective.
He has lots of windshield time, and he comes up with those questions.
I just don't think
That's what I
I'm
attribute it to.
I don't think I'm that interesting.
So
Don is unique. He's got a unique brain.
Unique
See,
is
Don,
a good word.
That's your flaw.
Is that polite for weird?
It depends.
I prefer eclectic.
Okay.
So here's my question, Don. It's going to be multiple choice.
Oh, boy.
Depending on your answer to the multiple choice question, there will be follow-up questions.
Okay.
I'm going to give you the choices before I ask you the question.
All right.
A, does not exist. B, it does exist. C, it existed at one point but no longer. What is Don Cook's stance on Sasquatch?
Thinking about it too long, it already tells me what I need to know.
he's trying to figure out a
Spur
different
of the moment. Spur of the moment. Come on.
To be perfectly honest with you, it's not really a subject I think on very often.
Well, you don't have to think on it often. I just want to know I really wanted to know what your gut reaction was.
Possibly at one time, but not anymore.
Okay. Then my follow-up question is when and where?
In, I don't know.
Specific year or time frame. Give us a time frame.
Cro-Magnon period. Trans-Siberia.
Okay, well,
We have a geographic point as well as geological time reference.
Don's use of the word Trans-Siberian was worth asking the question. I was a little bit disappointed.
Or Cro-Magnon.
In your answer, Don, I expected it to be more well-developed. But
I was more upset with the amount of time it required him to kind of come up with an answer.
That's because
Per Tolles.
it is a subject that I might think about once every 17 years.
Well, I don't dwell on it. I just...
It's just not even on the sheet of crap to think about.
So you don't think like Jordan Peterson does, whereby he takes something and thinks about it for an extended period of time until he solves it?
Well, I usually have more immediate things I've been dealing with.
He does, like aphids and cotton.
Which is what we're talking about today.
Or plant bugs and cotton. Or just all things insect, since July is right on our doorstep.
It's probably going to be kind of a little of everything of what is or isn't or potentially going on at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't have a specific topic. We're just doing bugs today.
Yeah, because we're getting just odds and ends questions coming in right now. At least that's what I've been getting.
Okay, Tyler, so give us a rundown on the phone traffic?
Cotton. I guess we kick it off with plant bugs because that's kind of the elephant in the room right now. It's that time of year, cotton's starting to square, corn's drying down. We got pigweeds, things like that are drying down. All host has been real dry. I'm worried that we may be getting lulled to sleep. I've heard a couple of fields being sprayed for plant bugs. I've heard that in other places that pressure's light. It's light here on station. So I don't think we need to get lulled to sleep. Cotton gets to third, fourth week of square, and then next thing you know, you get a big migration. We don't want to get caught with our pants down. So I think that's probably the glaring topic we need to be talking about in cotton, at least right now.
You looking along the roadside, yeah, it hadn't rained in a while, but things are still green.
Yeah.
And where you got irrigation water coming out, the end of the field, the stuffs are still green. I think they're there. I think they're holding in these, wild hosts, and as long as they're suitable, they're going to stay there.
They're there because we got out in one of your fields, Jason. We got out in one of your pigweed patches and swept plant bugs yesterday, and we can catch 500, 800 adults in a couple minutes.
You're welcome.
Thank you. But yeah, they're definitely in those hosts, and once those hosts start to become unfavorable, we could very easily see ourselves in a big adult migration. Which, if we talk about control, early season, we always recommend something cheaper, a imidacloprid or one of the neonics, because it's a little bit cheaper. And
by early in the season, you mean early in the insecticide spray season?
Yes, first couple weeks of square. And as we get closer to bloom, we've always harped on the benefits of using diamond, but keep in mind to see those big benefits, and Don always makes this point, to see those big benefits, it has to coincide with an adult migration. We've always said third week of square. Not always the third week of square. Sometimes we get it later, sometimes we get it earlier. So, but there is a lot of value in utilizing that product early season. And again, it seems like when we use it in the mid-season, it provides us some more returns. So it's a good product that we need to be thinking about using as we get closer and closer to bloom.
As we progress through the spray season, then what do those treatments evolve into? You said start off with the less expensive
Yeah,
ones.
we try to be cheaper on the early end of square, and then when we get into bloom, when we start focusing
then you got to bring the hammers.
We're starting to look at nymphs and things like that, and it gets to be more expensive. You got more expensive products, but that comes with better control, better residual, things like that. Go ahead, Donna.
The other thing is those things that we typically use and recommend during the squaring period tend to be less impactful on beneficials.
Right.
And then we get into bloom, it's no holds barred, whatever you got to do to manage plant bugs. And then a lot of times we're using stuff that can be pretty harsh on beneficials, that if you got to go, you got to go.
That's right. And we try to use as little acephate early in the season as we can so that we don't blow up spider mites. And this would have been probably, if one or two fewer rains, this would have been a really good year for spider mites early season. And we use acephate, we can flare them up real good. But when it gets to the time where we start blooming and we start running a whole bunch of nymphs, you got to spray what's there. And if something else happens, we can react to it. But you can't plan every single spray around, not flaring something else, because you'll never get anything accomplished.
Yeah, and another thing plays that we really have so few options that something you just have to do manage the problem, and then if another one comes along, deal with it at that time.
A couple of organophosphates, you got Transform, pyrethroids, Diamond,
Transform, pyrethroid, which is usually bifenthrin, and then
Vidrin and
acephate, and that's it.
Rotation obviously is key there. So it's in a typical season, we use a lot of the same product. We just try to space it out, as best we can to try to mitigate any issues there.
Touch on crop response, Tyler, because I've gotten a couple questions this week about mixing insecticides with herbicide applications, and do I mix it, or do I split it out, or do I put the insecticide with this herbicide and leave the residual out and make a separate application? So what's your stance on that?
And I'm going to toss this to Don, because I've heard a lot about acephate. We always talk about acephate and mixing acephate with things. I've always seen that folks say acephate will heat stuff up.
Well, my perspective on this, and I don't have any data, I haven't done this, I'm not sure anybody has. My thoughts on this is solvent load. Is if you have I'll say you're running glyphosate, dual, and then you're running something else, say an insecticide that has a relatively high formulated rate, say a pint or something that's heavy solvents, you're adding to that solvent load. And that's where I think you get the burn, the leaf burn.
Right.
Usually powders like acephate or transform, there's no solvents in them. So unless there is a reaction with the active, I don't see how it makes it worse.
I agree with that. So, just on the herbicide side of it, if I put Roundup and Liberty together, well, both of those are preloaded with surfactant.
Yep.
Well, then I add Dual Magnum or any metolachlor. Well, it's an EC, so it's an oil base.
Yep.
And that's not surfactant, but oil is a type of surfactant, so it has surfactant properties. Or
it has the petroleum solvents in there.
Right. It's got the solvents, to use your word. So I think that stacks up. And then if you did add something insecticide-wise that had a load, then it could further compound it. The stuff I always quote, we did this decades ago now, but when Wide Strike was big and we were spraying Liberty on Wide Strike, the question was the mixtures, and then just to take it as far as we could possibly push it. I mean, we had stuff that we did 2x rates of Roundup, Liberty, Dual Magnum, and dimethylate.
Yeah.
And that was
Dimethylate would do it.
And that was on Jeff's recommendation. That dimethylate was probably the hottest
Yep.
insecticide you could spray at the time.
Well, it's an EC, and the rates run from a pint to a pint and a half.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big solvent load on a per acre basis.
And then we drop a 2x rate
exactly.
in the tank at that. So we would just absolutely hammer some cotton. But the rates were, like I said, off the charts, and it recovered.
Well, what really drove this home to me, and we're going way back. This is, pre-boll weevil ERAD days. You could always, if you're defoliating cotton and you got the rates too high and the solvents too much, you burn a bunch of leaves and stick them.
Yep.
And drop was always temperature sensitive, and you could heat it up with putting methylparathion in there, which was what we used for weevils. If it was warm, you would stick a bunch of leaves and fry them. But you could run 1.5 ounces of a pyrethroid, much lower actual amount per acre, and not stick the leaves. And that's what drove it home to me. It's the solvent load that you're putting out there along with the temperature.
Yeah, that's the same concept that we're talking about here.
So you talked about dimethylate really adding to that burn. Would you expect the same out of Bidrin? Because I think that's what most folks would be using.
I would say it would be less. Bidrin is really not. It says it's an EC, but it looks more like a soluble liquid, because it doesn't get cloudy when you mix it in there in the water like the true ECs do.
In my experience, Tyler, which is limited, if your environmental conditions line up right and the herbicide mix lines up right and add the Bidrin, then you get it. But just on a straight expectation of, hey, I'm going to get a little bit of burn with Bidrin, I think in my history, less so than dimethylate.
And
it would be an in-between.
Yeah.
That's where I would kind of figure.
I was just going to ask which environmental condition, because sometimes with what we deal with in the fungicide world, it's hard to pinpoint exactly which one of those elements of the environment, because it's sun, full sun, cloud cover, dew, relative humidity, temperature, and which one of those factors into that situation.
I think you're right. It's a moving target, Tom.
Yeah, it's totally a moving target, because I was going to ask Don, and when you talk about those solvent loads, then environment probably plays a very small role in that. It's not as it is like in phytotoxicity in the fungicide world, where it seems to be more reliable or reliant on some environmental component.
I think it can play a role. I mean, if it's full sun and 98, 99 degrees, that's prime time for it.
Right after an irrigation, the plant's really transpiring, and there, of course, water vapor coming off the soil. That changes that microenvironment right there around the canopy. It's just a lot of dots to connect to say it does it here, but it probably won't do it here. I think it's too many things that are interconnected.
It's a bunch of components that makes it a little, it's a moving target. It's difficult to pinpoint and say, well, you got to be careful of this component more than the others.
Well,
No.
and going back to your first question, because you said, what was our stance on it, splitting it out or running it all together? I mean, you have to take economics into account there. I mean, how many times you want to run across your field?
I said this when I guess this was last week, Tom, when we talked about goosegrass. I hate telling somebody, man, probably the best thing to do is split it out. And when you get like on insecticide applications over big acres or herbicide applications over big acres, there are situations where the cost is not as bad as the time that
Exactly.
you got to go
Yep.
all back over the whole thing a second time. You just don't have time to do it.
Yeah.
I'd say from our perspective, it's not an efficacy issue. I'm not aware of any
Yeah.
antagonism. It's just, what does your label allow, and
What are you willing to stomach?
what do you think your risk is of some burn,
Yeah.
and is it tolerable, like you said?
And in the case of cotton, there's burn, which is foliar, and then there's the potential for fruit shed, which is altogether something different.
Usually what we see is just leaf spotting.
That's right. What about aphids?
I haven't heard of any. Have you?
The only aphids I've seen this year were on a volunteer plant, and we've got tests out. We're probably going to flare some at some point today, try to spray some diamond on them, see if we can flare them up.
I
seen
saw
any.
some in East Mississippi
Yeah.
last week.
I don't know if it counts. I saw
Couple
one
of
on my
fields.
one of my okra plants yesterday. Is it dries up? It's kind of getting that time.
Yeah, nothing to really speak of. And once folks start running transform,
Yeah.
it's going to be a non-issue anyways.
Well, Don, what about soybeans?
Things are pretty quiet. I had somebody ask me about if he was missing something. I said, well, what makes you ask that? He said, well, I hear of folks, are spraying fungicides on R3, R4 beans, and they're putting an insecticide in there. I said, well, that's one of our best insect management strategies, is planting early. We outrun everything. Outside of just some oddball situations, I wouldn't expect to see much right now. We had a student the last couple of years, he was doing some of this automatic stuff. And on the early planted beans, we're checking them once a week. We never broke threshold on anything.
So to translate that, you're saying don't get shamed into spraying an insecticide on your soybeans.
Yeah. I'll also say, from a grower standpoint, if it's your money, you spend it how you want to. I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm not going to get bent out of shape if you want to do that, because it's your money. If you want to throw it out the window, that's fine with me too.
What Drew say with it? Did he say something like that was one of the big calls that he got on the front end of starting to irrigate was, all my neighbors are irrigating, do I need to irrigate?
Well, Larson was telling a good one last week about all the neighbors in an area are irrigating. This guy's not irrigating because he's waiting for a soil moisture sensor to tell him to irrigate. And somebody stopped by and said, hey, what's wrong? Is your well down? Your well motor broken? Can we help you fix it?
Well,
Just the peer pressure, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's just astronomical.
all kind of funnies aside, from our standpoint, you're not going to see a benefit from any insecticide application unless you have a insect pest at threshold.
Something I just thought of, Don, driving down the road, if you drive up Highway 61, you see a big chunk of the soybeans that are all about the same age because we got them planted in that really brief window. So anticipate possibilities for later on in the season. Can that cause issues, or does that spread them out better?
Well, the general consensus has been, on a normal year like this, we plant 40 to 60% of the beans early, and then whatever's left, that last 10 to 20%
It's
probably
just
gets
left to the wolves.
Well, that's probably what gets 90% of the insect problems.
Yeah.
If we planting in mid-April, we outrun so much. I can, on my stuff here, unless I have a seedling problem, I don't have to make an insecticide application. I outrun everything. Is that late stuff is what catches most of it. I want to circle back on something on the automatics. There's one situation where I agree with folks. If you're in an area that has historical and consistent velvet bean caterpillar problems, where you can say, look at the calendar and say, in this 10-day period, I'm going to have velvet beans. And there's places in Mississippi that does that. That automatic Dimlin application, R3, R4 works because velvet beans are so sensitive.
What is that 10-day period?
Well, that depends on your area.
Okay.
South Louisiana, they do it all the time because they can write it on the calendar when it is.
Don, talk about what you'd expect to get out of Dimlin from the time it leaves a sprayer. How long you think it's hanging around?
For velvet beans, 2 weeks. Anything else, 30 minutes.
Does 30 minutes qualify as residual, Don?
No.
Qualifies
Well,
as ephemeral.
Here's the deal. We did this on farm, and even late planted beans where we had some severe looper issues, they walked through Dimlin. They walked through it like it wasn't there. Its utility for me is very defined. It's pretty good on velvet beans. It's good on some cutworms in certain situations. It's pretty good on some grasshoppers, nymphs.
Yes.
But when you get into bowworm, soybean loopers, they're much better choices.
Well, if you think about the timing in which folks are putting out Dimlin, if we're talking R3 soybeans, you may have some bollworms in the field around that time, but loopers should be, in our area, well behind outside of that range. So if you put out Dimlin thinking you're going to pick up some loopers later in the year, it's not going to happen.
Well, that's true, but it has very poor activity on loopers
to begin with.
An hour after you put it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 40% at best.
Well, and you've also had some people suggest that being as it is a chitinase inhibiting insecticide, that it would have some fungicidal properties within those organisms that have chitin in their cell walls. And it's not an effective fungicide. It's an insecticide, and we shouldn't expect that we're going to get activity out of it on plant pathogenic fungi.
Yeah. That would be your area. I mean, I would, common sense would tell me that, or maybe not necessarily that's the right word, but that's your area expertise, and
allegedly,
well, more than allegedly. When folks ask me about the fungicide, I said, I just don't know. I don't know about fungal organisms enough to know if it has any impact or not. If you plant when we want to plant for yield, most of the time for bowworm, loopers, stink bugs, a lot of times we outrun them.
Don, wrap up by reminding folks about your situation with rice stink bugs for 2024.
We've got a lot of rice either right at head or fixing to. With the 10-shoe supply, we have to run out before we have a chance of getting a Section 18 for indigo. If there's still 10-shoe available and we make an application, it is highly likely they will come back and say, no, you have an alternative that is labeled. We're not granting this.
So what do people need to do about that?
Well, if we do run out and, they're saying, we're done, there's no more, then let me know as quick as we can, and then we'll get the Section 18 application submitted. With the amount that's available, we can't just do it early. It's very possible we may get through this season without needing a Section 18. We'll just wait and see.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm sorry, Tyler has one point
more
to add.
thing, because Don's talking about regulatory stuff. The acephate comment period has been extended 30 days, so now it's the end of July. If you use acephate, if you're a grower consultant, if you use acephate, get some comments in, because I think all those comments help us in the fight to keep as much as we can.
I've seen a couple for some crop advisors from here in Mississippi that have been submitted.
If you use acephate, write a letter, talk about how much you need it, how much it does for you and your growers, and submit that. See if we can try to mitigate our losses on the insecticide front.
Thank you, both of you. Good to see y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.